This is one of the strangest scandals in motorsport history. A race involving some of the greatest drivers who've ever lived, and a race that may have been rigged for millions. This is the story of the 1933 Tripoli Grand Prix. Now, before we get to the scandal, you need to understand why anyone cared about the Tripoli Grand Prix in the first place. Because today, if you ask a motorsport fan to name famous Grand Prix circuits from history, they'll probably say Monaco, Monza, Silverstone, Spa, you get it. But Tripoli doesn't usually make the list. But in the 1930s, Tripoli was becoming one of the most important races in the world. And that was no accident. Because at the time, Libya wasn't an independent country, it was part of the Italian Empire. And Mussolini's fascist government wanted to showcase Libya as proof of Italy's power. The regime poured money into infrastructure projects, roads, buildings, ports. And, yep, you guessed it, a racing circuit. The result was the Mellahah circuit, located just beside a large salt lake outside Tripoli. The place looked like someone had drawn a race circuit across the edge of the Sahara Desert. It was flat, it was open, and it was very fast. The sort of circuit where drivers spent long periods with the throttle wide open, and survival mostly depended on bravery, skill, and luck. I mean, mostly luck, because this was 1930s motor racing, so safety regulations weren't really a thing yet. And yet people loved it. Grand Prix racing was glamorous, drivers were celebrities, and crowds flocked to the events. So the organisers of the Tripoli Grand Prix wanted something that would make their race even more impossible to ignore. And what they came up with was arguably brilliant, but also arguably catastrophically stupid. The scheme became known as what translates to the race of millions. And the concept was simple. The organisers created a huge national lottery, and people across Italy could buy tickets. The money generated would help fund the event, and winning lottery tickets would be paired with drivers competing in the race. So if your driver achieved a top result, you won an extraordinary cash prize. For 1933, the prize money was staggering. First prize was 3 million, second prize was 2 million, and third prize was 1 million. This was change your life forever money. And naturally, people went mad for it. Tickets sold in huge numbers, and the race generated headlines everywhere. And the organisers congratulated themselves on creating one of the most successful promotional campaigns in motorsport history. But there was a problem that no one noticed, or perhaps more accurately, a problem that everyone should have noticed, because the lottery draw was held 8 days before the race. 8 days. This single decision would eventually create decades of suspicion, because after the draw, everyone knew which ticket holders had been paired with the drivers. The newspapers reported it, the public discussed it, and even the drivers themselves became aware of the names attached to their fortunes. And suddenly a dangerous possibility emerged, because imagine you're a lottery winner and your prize depends entirely on one driver. And now imagine that driver knows exactly who you are. How long would it take before someone suggested you have a bit of a conversation? 5 minutes? 10? The organisers had essentially created a system where millions depended on the actions of a handful of racing drivers, and they'd given everyone more than a week to discuss it. So the opportunity for collusion was obvious, and the temptation was enormous. But before I continue, we need to meet the drivers involved here, because the first was Akil Vazi. Today, Vazi isn't quite as famous as some of his contemporaries, but in the early 1930s he was one of the greatest drivers on earth. He was cool, he was methodical, he was technically brilliant. And then on the opposite side was Tazio Nuvolari. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Nuvolari, it's difficult to overstate how revered he remains. Many historians still regard him as one of the greatest drivers who ever lived. He was fearless, aggressive, and almost supernaturally brave. He drove with a style that seemed impossible, and spectators and journalists adored him. And then there was Baccanin Bozzacini, one of Italy's most respected drivers, a winner, a Grand Prix star, and unfortunately today remembered far less than he deserves. So these 3 men would become central figures in the scandal, not because of anything they did on track, but because of what may have happened off it. Now, before I go on, please do give the like button a quick click, it really does help. So for decades, motorsport fans believed a dramatic tale that was largely popularised by Mercedes team manager at the time, Alfred Neubauer. According to Alfred, a secret meeting took place between the drivers and the lottery ticket holders. Deals were made, money changed hands, and the race result was effectively arranged beforehand. But the problem is, modern historians have even struggled to prove this. But what they have found evidence for is something slightly different. According to later research by historians, a meeting did indeed occur, and the participants appear to have included the holders of the tickets linked to Varzi, Nuvolari and Borzacini. And what was allegedly agreed was surprisingly practical, because rather than guaranteeing a race result, they created a syndicate, a profit-sharing arrangement. So if any one of the 3 drivers won the lottery jackpot, everyone would receive a share. Instead of competing against each other, they reduced their risk by pooling their potential winnings. Was it ethical? Not really. And was there evidence of race fixing? Well, it's kind of murky, because profit sharing isn't necessarily the same thing as deliberately manipulating a race. And so we come to the day of that race. Across Italy, people had discussed the lottery, and somewhere in the background sat an uncomfortable question. If millions are attached to the outcome of this race, can the outcome really be trusted? But away from that speculation, the circuit was packed and thousands lined the course. The event had become one of the biggest sporting spectacles in the Italian Empire, which is exactly what the organisers wanted. From the beginning, it became clear that the race itself wasn't going to be a leisurely procession. The leading contenders pushed hard, and gradually the contest narrowed to Varzi and Nuvolari, 2 of the greatest drivers in the world, and 2 men who had years of rivalry behind them, and also 2 men who were now carrying the weight of a lottery. If the race had really been fixed, this would have been the perfect opportunity to make things obvious, but that's not actually what happened. Contemporary reports describe an intense battle. Both drivers pushed relentlessly, neither appeared interested in making life easy for the other. And that fact would become one of the strongest arguments against the race fixing narrative. Because if you're trying to throw a race, why make it look this difficult? Gradually, the event approached its conclusion, and the crowd knew they were watching something special. As the race entered its final stages, the focus narrowed almost entirely onto Varzi and Nuvolari. The 2 rivals were separated by almost nothing, and that's where the conspiracy again encounters problems, because the ending was far too close. The finish was extraordinarily tight, with Varzi crossing the line first and Nuvolari following almost immediately behind, a margin of approximately 0.2 of a second. It was one of the closest finishes of the era. So if you were trying to manufacture a result, this would have been a very risky way of doing it. But still, the suspicion remained, because the winner happened to be one of those drivers at the centre of the controversy. And the optics were terrible. Varzi wins, the lottery pays out, and the profit sharing arrangement becomes relevant. And over time, various theories swirled, with that main story publicised by Alfred Neubauer, who alleged that Nuvolari, Varzi and Borzacini, along with their respective ticket holders, conspired to decide the outcome of the race. However, later research suggests that the story is a bit of a popular myth invented by Neubauer, who wasn't even present at the Grand Prix. The more researchers investigated, the less convinced they became that the fixing story made any sense. This was significant because until then, many people had simply accepted Alfred Neubauer's account as fact. And over the following decades, researchers examined the case in far greater detail, but they found very little hard evidence to say that the race had actually been fixed. But that's not to say it wasn't. The fact still remains that the pre-race meeting did happen and enormous sums of money were involved. So, was the 1933 Tripoli Grand Prix fixed? Well, after nearly a century of investigation, the honest answer remains: we just don't know. If you enjoyed this story and fancy a bit more, there's a video on screen now that I think you'll love.